I walked into that lawyer's office thinking it was just another routine appointment to sign some papers. Just formalities, nothing more. But the moment I stepped through that door, I could feel something was terribly wrong. The secretary's hands were shaking when she handed me the documents. Her eyes were pleading, desperate even. "Please," she whispered urgently, "read this first. Read everything carefully before you sign anything." My heart started racing. What could possibly be in those papers that had her so terrified? I sat down and began reading, line by line, word by word, and then I saw it. The clause hidden in the middle of page 7. My blood ran cold. My hands started trembling so violently, I nearly dropped the papers. This wasn't just about signing documents. This was about everything I had worked for my entire life, everything I had built, everything I thought was protected and safe. They had planned this so carefully, so meticulously. But what they didn't know was that I had my own plan, and I was about to turn their entire scheme upside down. Would you have seen it coming? Comment below what you would do if someone tried to steal everything from you. The morning started like any other Tuesday. I woke up early, made my coffee, and checked my phone for messages. That's when I saw the email from the law firm. Appointment confirmed for 10 a.m. today. Please bring identification. Documents ready for signature. I remembered scheduling this weeks ago. Something about finalizing the estate paperwork after my husband passed away 6 months earlier. The grief was still fresh, but I was trying to move forward, to handle all the legal matters that come with losing your spouse of 35 years. I got dressed in a simple navy blue dress. Nothing fancy. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to get through this appointment, sign whatever needed signing, and go home to the quiet house that still felt too empty without him. The law office was downtown, in one of those tall glass buildings that always made me feel a bit intimidated. I had never been comfortable with lawyers and legal jargon, but my husband had always handled these things. Now it was all on me. The reception area was cold and sterile, all white marble and chrome furniture. I gave my name at the front desk, and a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair barely looked up from her computer screen. "Take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly," she said in a flat, disinterested voice. I sat down on one of those uncomfortable modern chairs and waited, watching other people come and go, everyone looking so purposeful and important. After about 15 minutes, a tall man in an expensive suit appeared. He had slick-back dark hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mr. Davidson. I'll be handling your paperwork today. Please, follow me." Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Maybe I was just nervous about all of this legal business. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. He led me down a long hallway lined with closed doors, our footsteps echoing on the polished floor. We entered a conference room with a massive wooden table and leather chairs. Sitting at the head of the table was someone I recognized immediately, and my stomach dropped. It was my late husband's business partner, Richard, and next to him sat my husband's sister, Margaret. I hadn't expected either of them to be here. Richard stood up with that same practiced smile. "So glad you could make it," he said, as if this was some kind of social gathering. "We have some important documents for you to review and sign today." Margaret didn't even look at me. She was staring at her phone, her lips pressed into a thin line. We had never gotten along, not in all the years I was married to her brother. She had always thought I wasn't good enough for him, that I had married him for his money. The truth was, when we married, he had nothing. We built everything together, from the ground up. Every business success, every property, every investment was the result of our partnership, our hard work, our sacrifices. Would you do the same in my place? Mr. Davidson pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table in front of me. "These are the final documents regarding your late husband's estate. Standard procedure. Just need your signature on a few pages, and we'll be all set." He spoke quickly, casually, as if this was no big deal at all. He started flipping through pages, pointing to signature lines with his expensive pen. Here, and here, he said, barely giving me time to even glance at the words on the page. Something felt wrong, very wrong. My instincts were screaming at me to slow down, to read carefully, but I felt pressured by the 3 sets of eyes watching me. Richard was leaning back in his chair, with his arms crossed, looking impatient. Margaret was now staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and Mr. Davidson kept tapping his pen on the table, a nervous habit that made the pressure even worse. I'd like to read through everything first, I said quietly, pulling the documents closer to me. Mr. Davidson's smile faltered for just a second. Of course, he said, but his tone suggested he found this inconvenient. Though I should mention, it's quite technical. Legal language can be confusing for someone without experience in these matters. I can summarize the key points if that would be easier. There it was, that subtle condescension, the implication that I was too simple, too uneducated to understand my own husband's estate documents. My face burned with the insult, but I kept my voice steady. I'll read it myself, thank you. I pulled the papers even closer and started from page 1. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could feel their frustration building with every page I turned. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? The first several pages were standard boilerplate language about the estate, listing properties and assets I recognized. Our family home, the vacation cabin we bought 20 years ago, bank accounts and investment portfolios. Everything seemed in order. But then I reached page 7, and something caught my eye. A clause buried in the middle of dense legal text. I had to read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. The clause stated that upon signing these documents, I would be relinquishing my rights to the primary business entity my husband had founded, transferring full ownership to Richard as the surviving partner. Furthermore, I would be accepting a settlement payment of $50,000 in exchange for all claims to the company, its assets, its properties, and its future earnings. $50,000. For a company worth millions, for a business I had helped build from nothing, working beside my husband for decades, handling the books, managing employees, making critical decisions when he was too sick to do it himself. My hands started trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked up at the 3 people sitting across from me, and suddenly everything made sense. The quick appointment, the rushed signatures, the pressure to not read carefully. This wasn't about finalizing my husband's estate. This was about stealing everything I had worked for. This clause here, I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. On page 7. This transfers ownership of the entire company to Richard. I looked directly at him. For $50,000. Richard shifted in his seat but maintained his composure. Well, yes, he said smoothly. That's the standard buyout clause that was in the original partnership agreement. When one partner passes away, the surviving partner has the option to purchase the deceased partner's share at the agreed-upon valuation. Agreed upon valuation? I could hear my voice rising. The company is worth over $3 million. You're offering me $50,000 and calling it fair? Margaret finally spoke up, her voice dripping with disdain. The company was Richard's idea originally. My brother just provided some initial funding. You were never really part of it. You were just a wife. You have no idea how to run a business. $50,000 is more than generous for someone with no real claim. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Just a wife. No real claim. After 35 years of partnership, of sacrifice, of working late nights and early mornings, after handling payroll when money was tight, after personally guaranteeing loans when banks wouldn't trust just my husband's signature, after managing the office, the employees, the contracts, the clients, just a wife. I felt tears threatening to spill, but I refused to let them see me cry. I need time to think about this, I said, starting to gather the papers. Mr. Davidson leaned forward quickly. I'm afraid that's not possible. This appointment was scheduled specifically for today because there are time-sensitive tax implications. If you don't sign today, you'll lose the settlement offer entirely, and the matter will go to probate court, which could take years and cost you far more in legal fees. It was a threat, barely disguised. Sign now or lose everything fighting in court, spending money I might not have on lawyers I couldn't afford. They had planned this perfectly. They had waited until I was most vulnerable, still grieving, still overwhelmed by the loss of my husband. They thought I would be too confused, too emotional, too weak to fight back. Richard stood up and walked around the table, placing his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to seem comforting but felt threatening. "Look," he said in a patronizing tone, "I know this is difficult, losing your husband, dealing with all this legal stuff, but you need to be realistic. You're what? 62 years old? You're not going to run a construction company? You don't know anything about the industry. Take the money. It's enough to live comfortably. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. How would you act in this situation?" I looked down at his hand on my shoulder and felt something inside me snap. Not break, but snap into place. A cold, clear fury settled over me, washing away the fear and grief and uncertainty. I stood up abruptly, causing Richard to step back. "I need to use the restroom," I announced. "I'll be right back." Before anyone could object, I walked out of the conference room, my heart racing but my mind crystal clear. I didn't go to the restroom. I stood in the hallway, trying to think, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I heard a soft voice behind me. "Excuse me." I turned to see a woman in her 30s, dressed in a simple skirt and blouse. She was the secretary I had seen earlier in a different part of the office. Her eyes were wide with concern, and she was holding a manila folder. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "But I couldn't let you go back in there without knowing the truth." She handed me the folder. "My name is Jennifer. I've been working here for 6 years. I typed up those documents you're being asked to sign. But what they didn't tell you is that I also typed up these." She opened the folder to reveal another set of documents. "Your husband came to this office 2 months before he passed away. He was very sick, but he was care-minded. He wanted to make sure you were protected. He created a new partnership agreement, specifically revoking the old buyout clause and establishing you as the majority owner of the company upon his death. He filed it properly. It's legally binding." My hands were shaking as I took the documents. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Because Mr. Davidson told me to destroy these documents. He said they were never filed, that they didn't matter. But I couldn't do it. I made copies. I've been so scared. But when I saw you walk in today, looking so sad and lost, I knew I had to help. What they're doing in there is fraud. It's theft, and I can't be part of it anymore. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this." I looked down at the documents in my hands. There it was, in my husband's shaky signature from when he was so ill. A letter addressed to me. "My dearest love, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to leave you alone. But you are not helpless. You are not just a wife. You are my partner in every sense of the word. This company is yours. I have made sure of it legally and completely. Don't let anyone take what we built together. You are stronger than you know. Fight for what's yours. I love you always." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of rage and determination. My husband had protected me, even in death. He had known, somehow, that Richard would try this. He had prepared for it, and he had trusted me to be strong enough to fight back. "Thank you," I said to Jennifer, gripping her hand tightly. "Thank you for your courage." She nodded, still looking terrified but also relieved. "There's more," she said quickly. "In that folder, you'll find evidence that Richard has been embezzling from the company for the past 3 years. Your husband discovered it but didn't want to believe his partner would betray him like that. He was gathering evidence when he got too sick to continue. It's all there. Bank records, forged invoices, everything. Do you think I overreacted?" I took a deep breath and walked back into that conference room. All three of them looked up expectantly as I entered. Mr. Davidson was already sliding the original documents toward my seat. "All set?" he asked with that fake smile. "Ready to sign and put this behind you?" I sat down slowly, placing the new folder on the table in front of me. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I have some questions about these documents you want me to sign." Richard sighed impatiently. "We've already been through this. It's all standard procedure. Just sign so we can all move on." I opened the folder Jennifer had given me and pulled out the first document, my husband's revised partnership agreement. "Then perhaps you can explain why you're asking me to sign documents that directly contradict this legally binding agreement my husband filed 2 months before his death." The room went completely silent. Mr. Davidson's face went pale. Richard's confident expression crumbled into shock. Margaret leaned forward, trying to see what I was holding. "What is that?" she demanded. "That's nothing. Where did you get that?" I looked directly at Mr. Davidson. "I believe you know exactly what this is, since my husband filed it with this firm. Funny that you forgot to mention it today." Mr. Davidson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't recall seeing that document. It must have been misfiled, an administrative error." I pulled out the next paper, the letter my husband had written. I didn't read it aloud. It was too personal, too precious, but I let them see it existed. My husband was very clear about his intentions. He wanted me to have full control of the company, not partial ownership, not a buyout, full control, and he made it legally binding. Comment below what you would have done differently. Richard's face was turning red. "That's impossible. We had an agreement, a partnership agreement from the beginning." I nodded. "Yes, you did. And that agreement included a clause that allowed either partner to revise the terms with proper legal documentation, which my husband did. This document supersedes your original agreement." I could see the panic starting to set in now. Richard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You can't just show up with some random papers and claim they're legitimate." "They're not random," I said calmly. "They're filed with this law firm. They're notarized. They're witnessed. And they're legally binding." I turned to Mr. Davidson. "Unless you'd like to explain to the State Bar Association why you tried to hide legally filed documents and commit fraud." The lawyer looked like he might be sick. I can't. This is a misunderstanding." Margaret's voice was shrill with panic. "Richard, do something. She can't take the company. She doesn't know anything about running it. She'd destroy everything my brother built." I looked at her with all the cold fury I'd been holding back. "Your brother and I built that company together, while you were refusing to speak to us for 5 years because you disapproved of our marriage. We were working 18-hour days to make it successful, while you were vacationing in Europe with your inheritance from your parents. We were taking out second mortgages to keep the business afloat during the recession. Don't you dare tell me I had nothing to do with building that company." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I wasn't done. I pulled out the next set of documents from the folder, the evidence of Richard's embezzlement. "And speaking of building the company," I said, sliding the papers across to Richard, "perhaps you can explain these discrepancies in the financial records. The invoices from vendors that don't exist, the payments to consulting firms that have no employees, the checks made out to cash that you personally signed. Comment if you know someone like this." Richard's face went from red to white in an instant. He grabbed the papers, his hands shaking as he flipped through them. "Where did you get these? These are private company records. You had no right." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of power I'd never experienced before. I had every right. As of 2 months ago, I became the majority owner of that company, which means every record, every file, every transaction is mine to review. And what I found was 3 years of systematic theft. Over $400,000. Richard, you stole $400,000 from the company, from my husband, from me. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret looked at Richard in horror. "Richard, is this true? Tell me, she's lying." But Richard couldn't speak. He just stood there, holding the evidence of his crimes, looking like a man who had just watched his whole world collapse. Mr. Davidson was frantically typing on his phone, probably calling someone, maybe the senior partners in the firm. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "First, Mr. Davidson, you're going to file the correct documents, the ones my husband legally submitted, showing me as the majority owner of the company. Second, Richard, you're going to resign from the company effective immediately. You will not receive any severance, any buyout, or any compensation beyond what you're owed in unpaid salary, if anything. Third, you're going to repay every penny you stole, or I'm going to the police with this evidence." Richard finally found his voice. "You can't do this. You'll destroy the company. You'll destroy me." I stood up and gathered my folders. "No, Richard, you destroyed yourself when you decided to betray your partner and steal from the company he built. You destroyed yourself when you thought you could take advantage of a grieving widow, because you assumed I was too stupid or too weak to fight back. And you destroyed any chance of mercy when you sat there and called me just a wife with no real claim to the business I helped build from nothing. Was I wrong to feel this way?" I turned to Margaret, who looked absolutely stunned. "As for you, I know you've never liked me. I know you thought I married your brother for money. But he loved me, and I loved him. And we built a good life together. The fact that you couldn't see that, couldn't be happy for your own brother, says everything about you and nothing about me. You're no longer welcome at company events or on company property. If you want to remember your brother, do it privately, because you lost the right to be part of his legacy when you tried to help steal it from me." I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at Mr. Davidson. "I'll expect the corrected documents filed by end of business tomorrow, and I'll be reporting this incident to the Bar Association regardless. A lawyer who participates in fraud doesn't deserve to keep his license." His face was ashen. He nodded weakly, unable to form words. As I opened the door, I saw Jennifer standing in the hallway, pretending to organize files but clearly waiting to see if I was okay. I gave her a small nod of gratitude. I walked out of that law office with my head held high, my late husband's documents clutched safely in my arms. The morning air felt crisp and clean, like I was breathing freely for the first time in months. I sat in my car for a long moment, just letting it all sink in. The fear I'd felt walking into that office, the sick realization of what they were trying to do, the rage at their arrogance and cruelty, and finally, the satisfaction of watching it all crumble when confronted with the truth. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, professional but warm. "Is this the owner of Davidson Construction?" I paused. I'd never referred to myself that way before. "Yes," I said finally. "Yes, it is." The woman introduced herself as a potential client, interested in a major commercial project. "We've heard excellent things about your company. We'd love to schedule a meeting to discuss the project. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation." As I scheduled the meeting, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fighting to keep what my husband and I had built. I was fighting for my own identity, my own value, my own right to be respected and recognized for my contributions. For 35 years, I had been a partner in every sense of the word. But I had let others define me as just a wife, as if that somehow diminished everything I had accomplished. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into running the company. I met with employees who had known me for years and were relieved to have me in charge instead of Richard. I reviewed every contract, every project, every financial record. I found more evidence of Richard's theft and manipulation, including projects he had sabotaged to make the company look less valuable. I reported everything to the authorities, and within a month, Richard was facing multiple felony charges for embezzlement and fraud. Margaret tried to reach out once, leaving a voicemail that was equal parts apology and blame. She was sorry for how things had gone, but really, hadn't I overreacted? Couldn't we work something out that would benefit everyone? I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Mr. Davidson lost his license to practice law, and the firm paid a substantial settlement to avoid further legal action. Jennifer received a reward for whistleblowing and got a better job at a firm that actually valued ethics and integrity. The company thrived under my leadership. I brought in new contracts, expanded into new markets, and increased profitability by 30% in the first year. Turns out, all those years of working behind the scenes had taught me more than anyone, including myself, had realized. I knew the business inside and out. I knew the clients, the employees, the suppliers, the competitors. I had just never had the confidence to see myself as a leader rather than a support system. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? One afternoon, about 6 months after that terrible day at the lawyer's office, I was working in my office when I got an unexpected visitor. It was Richard's wife, Alina. We had been friendly once, years ago, before everything fell apart. She looked tired and sad. "I know I have no right to come here," she said quietly, "but I wanted you to know that I had no idea what Richard was doing. The embezzlement, the fraud, trying to steal the company from you. I knew nothing." I believed her. Alina had always been kind, always genuine. "I know," I said. "I never thought you were involved." She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. "I'm divorcing him. I can't stay married to someone who would do something so cruel, so dishonest. But I wanted to apologize on his behalf, even though I know it doesn't change anything. What he tried to do to you was unforgivable." We talked for a long time that afternoon. She told me how Richard had changed over the years, becoming more arrogant, more entitled, more convinced that he deserved success without having to work for it. She told me how he had resented my husband's talent and vision, always feeling like he was in the shadow of his more brilliant partner. "He couldn't admit that the company's success was because of your husband's genius and your hard work," Alina said. "So he convinced himself that he was the real brains behind everything, that you and your husband were lucky to have him." When she left, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger that had burned so hot for months was finally cooling into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. Richard's betrayal said everything about his character and nothing about my worth. I didn't need his approval or acknowledgement. I had proven, to myself and to everyone else, exactly what I was capable of. On the 1-year anniversary of my husband's death, I stood in the office we had once shared and looked at the framed photo of us from 30 years earlier. We were young, hopeful, ready to take on the world together. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. "We did it," I whispered to his image. "We built something real, something lasting. And I'm going to make sure it continues to grow, to thrive, to be everything you dreamed it could be." I thought about that morning, walking into the lawyer's office, feeling so lost and alone and vulnerable. I thought about the sick realization of what they were trying to do to me. And I thought about the moment I decided to fight back, to refuse to be a victim, to claim what was rightfully mine. The journey hadn't been easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the pressure. There were moments I doubted myself, wondered if I was really capable of running a company this size. But I pushed through those doubts, leaned on the employees who believed in me, and proved to myself that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The company I now led was thriving, but more importantly, I was thriving. I had discovered a strength and confidence I didn't know I possessed. I hired a new secretary, a young woman fresh out of college who reminded me of myself at that age. Eager and capable, but not always sure of her own value. I made it my mission to mentor her, to make sure she knew her worth, to ensure she never let anyone make her feel like she was just anything. I also established a scholarship fund in my husband's name for women pursuing careers in construction and engineering, fields where they were still often underestimated and undervalued. Every day, I walked into that office with my head held high, knowing I had fought for my place there and won. I had faced down betrayal, fraud, and the assumption that I was too old, too female, too unsophisticated to understand business. And I had proven them all wrong. Not by being ruthless or cruel, but by being prepared, by being smart, by refusing to accept their version of reality. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. People sometimes ask me if I regret how hard I fought, if I wish I had just taken the money and walked away from the conflict. The answer is always no. Not just because of the financial outcome, though running a successful company is certainly better than accepting $50,000 for millions in assets, but because fighting back, refusing to be victimized, standing up for my own worth, changed something fundamental in how I saw myself. For years, I had defined myself primarily through my relationship with my husband. I was his wife, his partner, his support system. All of those things were true, and I was proud of them. But I was also my own person, with my own skills, my own value, my own right to respect and recognition. It took almost losing everything to realize that I had never fully claimed my own identity, my own power. The woman who walked out of that lawyer's office with her husband's documents clutched in her hands was not the same woman who had walked in that morning. I learned that grief can make you vulnerable, but it can also make you fierce. I learned that people will take advantage of your pain if you let them, but you have the power to say no. I learned that being underestimated can actually be an advantage, because people's assumptions blind them to your true capabilities. And I learned that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from people you thought you could trust, but those betrayals reveal who you truly are in the face of adversity. The construction industry, traditionally dominated by men, wasn't always welcoming to a woman in her 60s taking over a major company. There were clients who questioned my authority, contractors who tried to take advantage of what they assumed was my ignorance, competitors who expected me to fail. But I had spent decades learning this business from the ground up. I knew how to read blueprints, negotiate contracts, manage budgets, and lead teams. More importantly, I had something many of them lacked: genuine respect for the people who worked for me and a commitment to quality and integrity that no amount of profit would compromise. Comment below what you would have done differently. Within 2 years, our company's reputation had never been stronger. We were known not just for excellent work, but for ethical business practices, fair treatment of employees, and reliable partnerships with subcontractors. The culture of the company changed under my leadership. Richard had run things with an iron fist, creating an atmosphere of fear and competition. I fostered collaboration and mutual respect. Employee turnover dropped dramatically, productivity increased, and our profitability reflected these positive changes. I often think about Jennifer, the secretary, who risked her job and possibly her safety to give me those documents. Her courage in that moment changed the trajectory of my life. I made sure she was rewarded for her integrity, but more than that, I made sure she knew how much her actions mattered. In a world where people often choose self-preservation over doing the right thing, she chose justice. She chose to help someone who had no power to help herself. That kind of courage deserves to be recognized and celebrated. There are still hard days. Days when I miss my husband so much it physically hurts. Days when the weight of running the company feels overwhelming. Days when I question decisions I've made or worry about the future. But even on those hard days, I know I made the right choice. I fought for what was mine. I refused to be a victim. I claimed my own power and my own identity. And in doing so, I honored the partnership my husband and I had built together, the love we shared, and the belief he had in me, even when I didn't fully believe in myself. Looking back on that morning in the lawyer's office, I realize it was a turning point, not just in terms of business or finances, but in terms of who I am as a person. I could have signed those papers. I could have taken the money and walked away. I could have accepted their narrative that I was just a wife with no real claim, no real value, no real understanding of the business world. But something in me refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was grief, turning to anger. Maybe it was the memory of all those years of hard work and sacrifice. Or maybe it was finally time for me to see myself the way my husband had always seen me, as strong, capable, and worthy of respect. Do you think I overreacted? The legal battles that followed were exhausting and expensive, but they were also empowering. Every time Richard's lawyers tried to intimidate me, I stood firm. Every time they questioned my capacity to run the company, I provided evidence of my competence. Every time they suggested I was being emotional or irrational, I responded with cold, hard facts. By the time it was all over, there was no question about who had the rightful claim to the company. The courts confirmed what my husband had established. I was the legitimate owner and operator of the business we had built together. Richard served 18 months in prison for embezzlement and fraud. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. His family disowned him. He lost everything, not because I was vindictive, but because he had broken the law and betrayed people who trusted him. I took no pleasure in his downfall, but I also felt no guilt about it. He had made his choices. He had decided that his greed and arrogance were more important than integrity and loyalty. The consequences he faced were a direct result of his own actions. Margaret and I never reconciled. Some relationships are too damaged to repair, and that's okay. I don't carry anger toward her anymore, but I also don't feel any obligation to maintain a connection with someone who tried to help steal from me. Life is too short to keep people in your life who don't respect or value you, even if they're family. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to simply walk away and focus your energy on the people and things that truly matter. The company continues to grow and evolve. We've expanded into green building practices and sustainable construction, areas I'm particularly passionate about. We've hired more women and minorities, creating opportunities for people who are often overlooked in this industry. We've established training programs for young people interested in construction careers, helping to build the next generation of skilled workers. The company has become more than just a business. It's become a legacy that honors my husband's memory while also reflecting my own values and vision. Comment if you know someone like this. I'm often asked to speak at business conferences and women's leadership events. People want to know how I went from grieving widow to successful CEO. They want to know how I found the strength to fight back when everything seemed hopeless. The answer is both simple and complicated. I fought because I had to. I fought because the alternative was to accept being stolen from and disrespected. I fought because my husband had believed in me and prepared the way for me, and I owed it to him to honor that trust. But most of all, I fought because I finally realized I was worth fighting for. The truth is, I had always been capable of running this company. I had always had the knowledge, the skills, the experience. What I lacked was the confidence to see myself as a leader rather than a supporter. It took a crisis to force me to step into a role I should have claimed years earlier. Sometimes we need to be pushed to our absolute limits before we discover what we're truly capable of. Sometimes we need to face our worst fears before we find our greatest strength. To anyone reading this story who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or taken advantage of, you are stronger than you know. You have value that doesn't depend on others recognizing it. You have the right to fight for what's yours, to demand respect, to refuse to accept someone else's diminished version of who you are. It won't always be easy. There will be moments of doubt and fear. There will be people who try to make you question yourself. But if you stand firm in your own truth, if you refuse to accept injustice, you will discover reserves of courage and strength you never knew existed. The moment that Secretary handed me those documents was the moment my life changed forever. Not just because of what was in those papers, but because of what I chose to do with that information. I could have been too scared to use it. I could have worried about causing conflict or making people angry. I could have talked myself into accepting less than I deserved, but I didn't. I walked back into that room and I fought. And that choice to fight, to stand up for myself, to refuse to be victimized, changed everything. Was I wrong to feel this Waitentar novementem conturier? Still remember the exact moment when everything became real? It was about 3 months after I had taken full control of the company, and I was sitting in what used to be my husband's office, now mine. A letter arrived from the State Business Bureau, officially recognizing the change in ownership and leadership. Seeing my name there, printed in bold letters as President and CEO, made something shift deep inside me. This wasn't just a title. This was acknowledgement. This was validation. This was proof that I had fought and won. The employees threw me a small celebration that afternoon. Nothing fancy, just cake in the break room and some heartfelt words. But what struck me most was what the senior project manager said. He had worked with us for over 20 years, knew both my husband and Richard well. I have to be honest, he told me in front of everyone, when all this happened, when Richard left and you took over, I was worried. Not because I doubted your intelligence or your heart, but because this industry is brutal to women, especially women your age. I thought they would eat you alive. He paused, his eyes getting a bit misty. But you proved me wrong. You didn't just survive, you thrived. You made this company better. You made us all better. And you did it with grace and strength that I've rarely seen in my career. Your husband would be so proud of you. Hell, we're all proud of you. The applause that followed brought tears to my eyes. These people, many of whom had known me for decades as the boss's wife, now saw me as their leader. Not because of my husband, but because of my own merit, my own decisions, my own leadership. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? But success in business was only part of the healing process. The deeper work was learning to live alone, to be alone, without my husband's presence filling the empty spaces of my days. The house that had once felt too quiet gradually became a sanctuary. I redecorated his office, not erasing his memory, but making it my own space to work from home. I started taking long walks in the morning, something I had never done before. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the chaos of the legal battles. One friend, Patricia, someone I had known since college, asked me over coffee one day, "Do you ever regret fighting so hard? I mean, $50,000 isn't nothing. You could have taken it and retired, traveled, enjoyed your life without all this stress and responsibility." I thought about her question for a long time before answering. If I had taken that money and walked away, I finally said, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what I could have accomplished if I had been brave enough to try. I would have carried the weight of that stolen opportunity forever. Yes, running the company is stressful. Yes, there are days I want to quit. But I'm living fully, using all of my abilities, proving to myself and everyone else what I'm capable of. That's worth more than any amount of money. Patricia squeezed my hand. You're braver than I would have been, she said softly. I shook my head. I don't think so. I think we all have that bravery inside us. We just don't always know it's there until we're forced to use it. The conversation stayed with me for days afterward. Was I brave, or was I just stubborn? Was I strong, or was I just too angry to quit? Maybe it was all of those things. Maybe bravery isn't about not being afraid, but about acting despite the fear. Maybe strength isn't about never feeling weak, but about pushing forward even when you want to give up. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. The legal resolution with Richard took almost a year to finalize completely. Beyond the criminal charges for embezzlement, there were civil suits to recover the stolen money. His assets were seized, his bank accounts frozen. The courts ordered him to repay every penny, though realistically I knew I would never see most of it. That money was gone, spent on his lavish lifestyle, expensive cars, and who knows what else. But the principle mattered more than the actual recovery. He had to face consequences for his actions. During the trial, some uncomfortable truths came out. Richard had been planning to push my husband out of the company for over 5 years. He had been systematically undermining him, sabotaging projects, and spreading rumors that my husband was losing his edge, becoming too old to run the business effectively. When my husband got sick, Richard saw his opportunity. He had convinced himself that he deserved the company, that he had earned it through his years of service, conveniently forgetting that without my husband's vision and my administrative expertise, there would be no company to take over. The most painful revelation came from Richard's own testimony. Under oath, he admitted that he had never respected my husband's decision to make me a partner in everything. She was just his wife, Richard said with contempt. Even in the courtroom, she had no business acumen, no industry experience. She was a secretary who married the boss and thought that made her important. The prosecutor asked him if he thought stealing from the company was justified. Richard's answer was chilling. I wasn't stealing. I was taking what should have been mine all along. That level of entitlement, that complete lack of remorse or self-awareness, confirmed that I had been right to fight back with everything I had. This wasn't a man who had made a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was someone who genuinely believed he was entitled to take whatever he wanted, regardless of the law, regardless of ethics, regardless of the harm he caused to others. If I had signed those papers that day, if I had accepted the $50,000 buyout, Richard would have destroyed everything my husband and I had built. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. One of the most unexpected consequences of everything that happened was the attention it brought from the media. A local business journal ran a story about the case, framing it as a cautionary tale about partnership agreements and estate planning. But they also highlighted my journey from grieving widow to successful CEO. The article called me an inspiration, a testament to the strength and resilience of women who refuse to be dismissed or diminished. The publicity brought new opportunities. I was invited to join the board of directors for several business organizations. I was asked to mentor young women entrepreneurs. I was featured in a regional magazine's list of most influential business leaders. All of this attention was uncomfortable at first. I had spent most of my life working behind the scenes, supporting my husband's public role. Being in the spotlight felt strange and sometimes overwhelming. But I also recognized the platform as an opportunity to share an important message, that women of all ages have value in the business world. That being a wife and partner doesn't diminish your professional contributions. That you're never too old to start a new chapter or take on new challenges. That fighting back against injustice isn't vindictive or petty, it's necessary and righteous. I received dozens of letters and emails from women who had seen the article or heard my story. They shared their own experiences of being underestimated, dismissed, or taken advantage of. Comment below what you would have done differently. One letter in particular moved me to tears. It was from a woman in her 50s who had been working in her family's business for 30 years but had never been given an official title or recognition. When her father died, her brothers tried to push her out, offering her a small settlement and telling her she had no real claim to the business. Inspired by my story, she had fought back, hired a lawyer, and discovered that her father had actually left her a significant share of the company in his will. Her brothers had hidden the will and tried to defraud her. She was now in the process of claiming what was rightfully hers. "Your story gave me courage," she wrote. "I was ready to give up, to accept what they told me I deserved. But reading about how you fought back made me realize I owed it to myself and to my father's memory to stand up for what was right. Thank you for being brave enough to share your journey. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Reading her words, I realized that my struggle had meaning beyond my own life. By refusing to be a victim, by fighting for what was mine, I had somehow given other women permission to do the same. The ripple effects of standing up for yourself extend far beyond your own circumstances. When you refuse to accept injustice, you inspire others to do the same. When you prove that women can lead and succeed, you open doors for the women who come after you. When you show that age is not a barrier to capability or success, you challenge the stereotypes that limit us all. This wasn't just about me and my company anymore. It was about something bigger, something more important. As the company continued to grow, I made a point of hiring and promoting women, especially women over 40, who were often overlooked in the job market. I created flexible work policies that acknowledged the reality of people's lives outside of work. I established a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination. I built the kind of company I wish had existed when I was younger, The kind of workplace where everyone's contributions are valued regardless of their gender, age, or background. Do you think I overreacted? One afternoon, about 3 years after that terrible day at the lawyer's office, I was working late when I heard a knock on my office door. It was Tom, one of our longest-serving employees. He looked nervous. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I gestured for him to sit down. Tom had been with the company since the beginning, had watched it grow from a small operation to a major regional player. He had worked for my husband, then for Richard, and now for me. "I need to tell you something," he said slowly. "Something I should have told you years ago, but I was too much of a coward." My heart started racing. What now? What other betrayal was I about to discover? Tom took a deep breath. "I knew Richard was stealing from the company. I suspected it about 4 years ago, and I was sure about 3 years ago. I even mentioned it to your husband once, but he didn't want to believe it. He said Richard was like a brother to him, that there must be some explanation." Tom's eyes filled with tears. I should have pushed harder. I should have gathered evidence and forced him to see the truth. But I was scared of losing my job, scared of causing trouble. And then your husband got sick, and it seemed too cruel to burden him with that knowledge. So I stayed silent, and I've felt guilty about it every single day since. He looked up at me with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry. If I had been braver, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe your husband would have dealt with Richard before things got so bad." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Another person who had known the truth but stayed silent. Another person who had prioritized their own comfort and security over doing what was right. I felt a flash of anger, but it quickly faded into something else. Understanding, maybe, or just exhaustion from carrying so much rage for so long. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked quietly. Tom wiped his eyes. "Because I can't carry the guilt anymore, and because you deserve to know. You've been so good to all of us, given us opportunities and respect that Richard never did. I needed you to know the truth, even if it means you fire me. Comment if you know someone like this." I thought about it for a long moment. Tom had made a mistake, a significant one. His silence had allowed Richard to continue stealing for years. But he was also human, flawed, and afraid like all of us. And he was trying to make amends now, even knowing it might cost him his job. "I'm not going to fire you," I finally said. Tom looked up in surprise. "But I need you to understand something. Silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't neutrality. It's complicity. When you knew Richard was stealing and said nothing, you became part of the problem." "I know," Tom said miserably. "I know, and I'll have to live with that." I leaned forward. "What I need from you now isn't punishment or self-flagellation. What I need is a promise that you'll never stay silent again. If you see something wrong, something unethical, something harmful, you speak up, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it might cost you something. That's the price of integrity." Tom nodded vigorously. "I promise. I swear to you, I will never make that mistake again." We talked for another hour that night. Tom told me other things he had observed over the years, small incidents and concerning patterns that he had dismissed or ignored. Nothing as serious as the embezzlement, but collectively they painted a picture of a company culture that had been broken for a long time.